First-person shooters didn't just die, they were murdered alive.
Oh, please don't bring back this trend.
Wait, I swear, I talked to ChatGPT about it, and wow, that is a very nuanced response.
Please don't do it.
Medal of Honor didn't just die? It was murder! Call of Juarez didn't just die? It was murder! Killzone didn't just die? It was replaced by a redhead. Far Cry didn't just die? It's being killed to death. Half-Life didn't just die? It was abandoned to death. Call of Duty isn't dying? Nicki Minaj is sitting on its face? And it's liking it. Halo didn't just die? It was replaced by Gears. Crysis did just die. Battlefield didn't just murder? It was die in a microtransaction. Stalker didn't just die?
Stalker has not died. Stalker lives, and with its sequel, comes hope. There almost wasn't, but this project means so much now that, for the first time in a long time, a story-driven first-person shooter seems to actually matter and be going somewhere promising in the same way that Red Dead Redemption and Cyberpunk 2077 matter. And those are not really first-person shooters. They're games you can play as first-person shooters. But finally, a game that is made as a first-person shooter intends to stand among them by taking itself seriously.
But what happened? How did we get here?
Well, the short answer is online gaming.
That's preposterous. Online gaming is the reason shooters got good in the first place.
There's a timeline between the 6th and 9th generations of consoles. Nice. In which we see shooters evolve from justifying their retail price with the single-player experience in the forefront and include multiplayer as an extra, to the 7th generation where it was pretty much a balanced deal.
What is that? Is that a flying tank?
And I think it's not a coincidence that this is also the golden age of the FPS. And to now, where multiplayer is front and center, campaigns are all but gone, or at least quality campaigns, and games are a service, not a product. At the same time, bare-bones titles like BattleBit Remastered put their AAA counterparts like Battlefield to shame.
How embarrassing.
You know, it is my opinion, but I believe that the single-player experience of a game is what establishes the reality and tone in which the multiplayer exists. Sometimes that thing is a movie, or reality, sure, but for unique IPs in the video game world, without a solid foundational lore that the multiplayer is faithful to, there's just too much room for fluidity when every publisher targets the biggest audience possible. If you need a large player base for your game as a service, you need to target the lowest common denominator. That's why they go free to play. This is what leads publishers to using games and their player bases as the metrics for competition as opposed to sales figures. And this is where the whole games as a service scam comes into play, and it is a scam, because the point of games as a service is not to offer games as a service. It's to keep you playing until the house collects. Casinos are games as a service, and video games had always, until now, been products, not services. And like the games in casinos, video games as a service ends up producing a carcinization effect in which everything becomes a different brand of the same thing. Each game that is a service has simply become a virtual casino, and casinos all evolve in similar ways to do the same things and become similar things because their objective is for the house to collect as much as possible by keeping you playing as much as possible. And that's where the cheap tricks and dopamine hacks come in. Think of them as addictive additives in your game. None of these on-screen rewards are really gameplay enhancers because they're part of the interface, not the game world. Sure, the interface should absolutely assist and inform the player to varying degrees, but if developers can substitute the interface with world elements, within reason, even better. Ammo counters, health bars, current objectives, and compasses, these are fine because without them, the player lacks important information that you don't want them interrupting the gameplay and have them open a menu to get back on track. But when you introduce objective markers and mini-maps with marked objectives, items, and enemies, you have to be careful because you start solving problems for the player, and you have to ask yourself to what degree you want that. In a multiplayer game where playing the objective is important, yeah, it's fine to tell the player, your squad leader wants you defending B. Your teammates dropped ammo here. They also tagged enemies there. But remember, the more that the UI does, the less the player has to think. And giving players problems that they will enjoy solving themselves is what makes single-player experiences so enjoyable. It's like playing Sudoku and reading a book, all while exploring an interesting location. I frankly do not know what makes multiplayer games enjoyable since I don't play online anymore. But back in my day, winning matches, topping leaderboards, and building stats is what made it enjoyable. But helping the player too much through the UI is a small sin compared to rewarding the player through the UI. We've already established that giving your players problems that they'll enjoy solving is at the heart of good gameplay design. So if the player can't solve problems without the interface, I'm looking at you, Far Cry 6 ammo system, or if the interface solves problems for the player, then you're not letting the game and its world do the stimulating. If you need an example of the world rewarding the player, just look at Alan Wake 2. It's full of that, and that's why that game is so beloved, and why I keep playing it despite not being a fan of survival horror. But back on track. What's worse is when the UI works to give the player rewards instead of the game world itself. It's like giving them that Colombian powder we all love with a name that starts with a C. You know, let's say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Coffee! Just kidding, it's cocaine. Here's a simple rule. The game needs to be just as playable and rewarding with these thingy-mabobs off. Do you remember Battlefield 1's incredible opening? Dropping everyone in a storm of steel, telling you that you are just a single frontline soldier in DICE's alternative universe version of World War I, and you are not expected to survive.
We're surrounded! We have to hold this line!
And then... What the heck is this thing doing on the screen? What am I, an Apache helicopter? Are we online? The point of a hit marker is to give players feedback over a network connection that their hits are connecting with the server. They do have a place in network play. Back in Hutch's quickscope in Call of Duty 2 days, that was their purpose. But somewhere along the way, I'm sure some corpo office boy at some publisher told their bosses that hit markers are satisfying, and they keep players stimulated, which they can do, because they're like cocaine. They're satisfying. Look at what happens to the like and subscribe button when you swaffle them and get hit markers. It's so satisfying. But what hit markers also do is block the view, and that's a bad thing if your developers worked really hard on high quality impact effects, animations, and ragdoll physics. I want to see my violence. Hey Mojo, why are you here? Playing an FPS.
I'm just here for the violence.
Yes, we're all here for the violence. No use in pretending we're not. Not only that, but not knowing if you hit an enemy, just knocked him down, or completely neutralized their ass is an important gameplay feature, especially in shooters. Did I hit this guy here? Am I safe now? No! But now I am, right? Wrong again, but now I am. But back to Battlefield 1. That game still works and is perfectly playable and cohesive with all the interface stimulants off. And it also does something for the player that I'll get to in a second. There's a reason why videos of Battlefield 1 gameplay with the HUD turned off blow everyone's minds and often go viral. Same goes for Stalker. A game is good when it is still perfectly playable and rewarding with all these elements turned off, even if it's considerably more challenging. You can still tell your friends and foes apart, you can still see where the objectives are and where the danger is. So if you treat the UI as an accessibility feature that improves general player competence for gameplay's sake, you can gradually tune how much UI you give the player. But when you prioritize selling drip for your operators and specialists, pitting Nicki Minaj and Neymar against Messi and Snoop Dogg, you've created a game world that you yourself as the creator don't take seriously. Making goofy add-ons is our job, it's the community's job, not yours. You should take your game seriously so that we can make all the goofy stuff happen ourselves. Battlefield was cooler when it was the players doing the cool stuff, not the trailers. This has been diluted in the pursuit of microtrannies. The heroes, the operators, that's what they're for. The only reason to have heroes is if you're a hero shooter. It's as if your lore has been invaded because it is out of focus, which is why we circle back to campaigns and the reality that they establish for the multiplayer. They are the gravity that puts the boots on the ground. You need to be faithful to your lore, and have good lore, of course, that's obvious, in order to make the game world engaging, be it multiplayer or single player. Shooter developers 20 years ago were using every clever trick they could to create a visually stunning, believable, engaging, and violent combat experience. So much work went into convincing players that they are a part of a virtual world that they are playing in, a world that reacts to their actions, even with graphics like these. This is all done with a tiny budget for physics calculations and graphical effects. But now that we have the CPU power to simulate physics with incredible accuracy for projectiles, animations, collisions, impacts, destruction, and we have the graphics power to display incredible detail and spectacle, and the power to simulate light, quite literally trace light rays, all things that would enrich the explosive nature of gunfights like crazy. Now that we have these things, what we often get in AAA games is cheap tricks like hit markers and UI elements to give players feedback instead of developers putting more work and making the world more reactive to the player in a way that satisfies the player. The thing is that good gameplay, unlike gambling schemes, doesn't evolve like crabs. Halo can give us open-ended levels where we really have to figure out how to fight, how to complete our objective. It's open-ended problem solving that's why the original trilogy for the Halo games is so good. How do we solve the problems that we call objectives? How do we fight? The game isn't realistic at all. There is nothing about Halo that is realistic, not even the gunfire explosions, none of this, but it is still real in its own world, and that's why it works. Stalker is so good for this very reason as well. It's why this entire channel has mostly focused on Stalker. The way you approach problems is open-ended, and the game doesn't tell you much. You have to figure things out by engaging with the world. What's even better is how any outcome is valid, and the story manages to continue even if so-and-so got killed, or if you solve the problem your own way instead of doing the way the quest giver asked you to. The game allows these things. It's not just that Stalker's world is alive in every way. The way the characters and creatures behave has a structure. This world exists in its own reality, and that reality reacts to the player. And Stalker's reality is very unique because it runs purely on simulation. The simulation of the life in it with a life. There's ballistic simulation, there's physics simulation, time of day simulation. And because Stalker relies as much as possible on simulation to give its world weight, this game is still alive and being modded into really different things, into whole entire games every single year, over and over again. And nobody gets sick of it, nobody gets tired of it. And that's such an important part of what makes shooters timeless and all games feel correct. The fact that you feel like you're taking part in events in a virtual world, be it scripted, simulated, procedurally generated, it doesn't matter as long as the game successfully makes you feel like you're a part of it. And there's so many ways that developers can do this. A good story works, a fun gameplay loop works. Great graphics do the trick too. One of my favorites is physics. Remember Killzone 2 and 3? The cell processor on the PS3 allowed these games to have so much visual complexity, yes, but also the physics for so many independent objects were on point. The weight of everything matched with the sound that the bodies and equipment make when they hit the ground. My dude, bodies are heavy, and heavy objects hit the ground pretty hard, especially if they're carrying momentum. They slam into things in their way, and Starfield isn't an example of a game that's setting many examples on how to do things, but its approach to physics and physical objects is commendable. Bodies hit the ground with weight. Empty casings react correctly with the environment, and so do loose objects. I get it, a lot of games have been running on consoles at 30 FPS, so slow-moving physics in some ways may actually help people appreciate their detail. But even consoles now run most games at 60 FPS, and I really like how Modern Warfare 2019 took advantage of this and took into account how fast firearms actually operate and how fast bullets impact things. That game was onto something, you know?
Then they ruined it.
Call of Duty, for all of its sins and all the things it does wrong, it does do a couple of things very, very well, which is making it feel good to shoot guns and, of course, shoot other dudes with guns. They've, for the most part, been pretty good with the weight of firing and the momentum of impact, for the most part. I'm not saying their legacy is perfect. There are clearly some games where just no. But even as far back as Call of Duty 2, where they didn't even have ragdoll physics, the shooting and the impacts felt correct. And in Call of Duty 3, the ragdolls were very, very good. And in many ways, I think that Call of Duty took a step back from Call of Duty 3 in between, where you would have fall animations combined with the ragdolls, and you could clearly see the transition, and it's not something that just Call of Duty suffers from. Other games suffer from it too. But now putting our focus back on Modern Warfare 2019, that game really did take into account how fast firearms actually operate and how fast bullets impact things. That game was onto something. I just really liked its approach to giving the player problems that they'll enjoy solving. One of them being the use of cover, which is so often ignored or poorly implemented by other games, including Call of Duty after Modern Warfare 2019. It really goes back to the whole games as a service and what you can give the lowest common denominator. The lowest common denominator was not ready for cover shooting. They wanted to cancel their slides. Well, Warzone was a commercial success. Yes, and so is cocaine. So are the Kardashians. As I was saying, getting the feel and the look of your firearms is super important. If they're replicas of real-life counterparts, get the details right. Please, I'm looking at you, Call of Duty World War II. God, what am I talking about Call of Duty so much for? But equally important is making the shooting enjoyable, which comes in the form of making visibility a priority. We often see dual rendered optics being implemented to correctly portray magnification, but they often come at the expense of blocking way too much of your view. Remember, in real life you have two eyes. You can see the stuff being blocked by the optics, so you have to find a way to consolidate vision when you implement magnified optics into a game. A good way of doing that is bringing the optic closer to the camera so that we have a larger sight picture so we can actually see what we're shooting at, and it's not like looking through a toilet paper tube. So yes, keep treating magnified optics like magnified optics, but also let us see, please. What else? This video is getting long. Yeah, use modern technology to ground the gunfighting some more. Volumetric gun smoke is great to see. This has been done so well by so many old games. It's a shock to me that it's not commonplace still. But you know what would be great to see? Seeing weather and time of day affect what gunfire and bullet trails look like. Moist conditions absolutely amplify the amount of vapor that's left in the air when guns are fired. Behind the bullet, at the muzzle, darkness means flashes are flashier. This sort of things is important. This stuff is important, guys. Come on. Impacts need to be violent, man. Like, this is an object hitting another object really, really hard. That kicks up dust and smoke. It's so refreshing when a AA game like RoboCop Rogue City was doing all this correctly. But yeah, reflecting how fast and violent firearms are is important. Why are you playing an FPS?
It's violence.
I don't care which brand of violence you pick, make it unspectacularly realistic, where headshots are like an off switch and bodies just drop, or have it be melodramatic with animations of dudes spinning around and holding their faces all they want, or if you want to go over the top and have limbs flying everywhere and the player is bathing in a bath of blood. Or even be conservative, go for a T rating, but still convey the velocity and weight of impacts. You don't need blood and gore effects to make shooting feel correct. I don't care, just pick a brand of violence and be faithful to it.
It's not real. It's not real.
Make the player enjoy fighting and don't leave us with a lazy shit marker.